Let's take a look at the numbers, then break it down by populations. We're looking at primarily three different surveys here. One done by Channel 12, which shows that only about 28% of people are going to be getting the vaccine in the initial rollout. We have another one that was done by Israel Hayom, which shows only 44% of the public are willing to get the vaccine. Then another one by Haifa University that shows that only 20% of the country, and it's actually lower if you look at the Arab demographics, are willing to get the vaccine in the first rollout. And we see very similar trends, even though the numbers are very different across the different surveys. They tend to mesh up and dovetail nicely with one another when you look at population demographics. There are two primary groups in Israeli society that are not intending to get the vaccine, or certainly not in the first wave. And that tends to be the ultra-Orthodox Haredi community as well as the Israeli Arab community. In both cases, these are groups that tend to distrust the governmental authorities. This is not exactly a new breakthrough, and we see similar trends in countries around the world. Most of the time, the groups of people that are against vaccination are the groups of people that are against large-scale government programs or distrust that the ruling governmental party or coalition has their best interest at heart. This is what we're seeing in the Haredi community. Let's break down the reasons for this for the ultra-Orthodox community, and then we'll extrapolate to some of the other populations as well. For the ultra-Orthodox community, they say that since the beginning of the pandemic, the scientific and medical measures that were put in place to reduce virus spread hit their communities the hardest. The Haredi community, the ultra-Orthodox, do not participate in greater Israeli society in the same way that the secular community does. They participate in an insular society that is made up by prayer groups and study groups, which require having a lot of people in close proximity with one another. In fact, the very minimum number you could have for any of these groups is 10, which is generally the maximum number set by health authorities. Obviously, it scales from there. They viewed any of these medical mandates as a direct attack on their way of organizing their communities and their societies. And as a consequence of that, you started seeing resistance against all forms of coronavirus measure, including, to this point, the vaccination program that's starting to roll out. Now, the Arab community, which is also showing very strong resistance, in fact, according to the University of Haifa, only 16% of the Arab Israeli communities intends to be in the first wave of vaccine rollouts, has a very similar story. It's not about a religious difference for them, but it is about them saying the government does not represent their interest and therefore not trusting a government vaccination program. What is the government doing to try to counteract these fears and to try to change these numbers? Well, for starters, Prime Minister Netanyahu is volunteering to be the first person to get a vaccine. Therefore, he can say if the head of the country is planning on getting it first, it's clearly safe and there's nothing to distrust. That's not going to dispel a lot of the religious claims, though. So the hope there is that they can go through the rabbis in the community, which are more or less the organizational unit of these communities, and have them change the mind of the community as a whole.